Welcome to the Mind Money Spectrum podcast, where your hosts, Aaron Agti and Trishul Patel, go beyond traditional finance questions to help you explore how to use your money to achieve the freedom you want in life.
In this episode, Aaron and Trishul discuss the simplest financial advice they can give someone in their 20s. It is to save more. They go deep on all the reasons why this simple advice is so fundamental to every other financial objective. They discuss the implicit benefits of spending less, maxing out your 401k, and compound growth. Saving more can give you flexibility, options, and a sense of control of your life. So invest smarter, not harder, by saving sooner rather than later. And now, on to our conversation.
Hi, my name is Aaron Agti. I'm a financial advisor in the Bay Area, and I'm here with Trishul Patel, a wealth manager on the East Coast.
Hey, Aaron, great to be here today, and thanks everybody for listening.
Great to be here as well. So a few weeks ago, Trishul and I had a conversation about kind of the very beginnings of investment advice, and kind of if someone's just starting off, what's the super basics, opening a Roth IRA, and at your favorite online brokerage, contributing the money into the Roth IRA and then buying a mutual fund or ETF, either some kind of growth allocation or a target date fund, something like that. And we were kind of sharing the reasonings behind that conversation with other clients and colleagues, and we're almost challenged, kind of given our personalities and our conversation style. Trishul and I really like going deep, going through all the complexities, discussing the nuance, and people point out that sometimes we might go a little too far in kind of just entertaining ourselves. And so we're challenged to almost try to get as simple as we could. And again, we took even this challenge too far of like trying to get simpler and simpler. So Trishul and I had a few conversations. We tried to come down to just the simplest financial advice you could give someone, and probably in their early 20s when they're starting their career, they're starting to make money. Like, I'm making money, what do I do with it? And so it's not going to come as a big shock, and I don't want to kind of bury the lead, but we kind of narrowed in on just saving. If we had to give a single piece of advice to someone in their 20s starting their career, it really was just save or save more. And I think today we want to try to address kind of why that is so fundamental to anything else, and kind of if you can save more, then all the other parts are kind of marginal benefits on top of that's so fundamental and foundational, and it really does make it that important that we're going to kind of try to address why that is the case. So Trishul, do you mind kind of think back of our conversations of kind of, if you're talking to someone in their 20s and just, I know you're a financial advisor, like what should I be doing? How would that conversation go with you, and kind of why is saving more just that important?
Again, I think just part of myself, I've always had this mindset that you should always kind of work smarter, not harder, meaning try to get the most bang for your buck, or try to put in the least amount of effort but get the most amount of benefit. And try taking all of that and trying to titrate it down into one simple piece of advice. I think it just relates to this notion of the sooner you start saving and the more you start investing at an early age, the more quickly you can reach your goals, or the more likely you are to meet your goals in terms of either financial independence, financial freedom. or just being able to accomplish all the things that you want to do in life. That time value adds so much to the ability for yourself to get a benefit by keeping your money invested in the markets longer. And just one more quip. One thing that we say is it's always about how much time you are in the markets, and not about actually timing the markets. So that time component is very critical. And when you're in your 20s, you have a good amount of time to make your money work for you.
So you think about in terms of kind of what should someone in their 20s do? I guess again, I like the conversation because that advice that does apply to anyone. Just kind of saving more would really apply to anyone. Just making things work a little better. And I have other thoughts as well, but it sounds like when you think about the single most important piece of advice, it's the starting early aspect, both in terms of kind of time for compound growth to play out, but also just kind of they're building that savings earlier. So it's kind of a combination of not just like, yes, we get 40 years instead of 30 years of growth, but that they're saving more money at earlier. Like, do you mind kind of going a little more deeper on that?
Yeah, there's a handful of benefits that kind of stem up from this one sole piece of advice. And to begin, yeah, it's about taking that money and investing it, meaning it gets invested for an extra 10 years, but you also get a very strong benefit from this extra 10 years just because of the fact that you have a 10-year head start. We mentioned this in an earlier episode when we looked at the power of compounding. And one example that we put forward is, imagine you have Aaron and Bizarro Aaron, and Aaron decides to, in his 20s, max out his Roth IRA and put 6,000 a year. Let's just assume that's what it is for the entire time frame of this example. So 6,000 a year for 10 years from age 20 to 30. And you compare that against Bizarro Aaron, who maybe isn't quite prioritizing things the same way, and in his 20s doesn't invest anything at all, but then kind of realizes that he should probably get his financial act together, decides to put 6,000 a year starting at age 30 for the next 30 years. So you have Aaron who invests for just 10 years in his 20s, and you have Bizarro Aaron who invests $6,000 a year, but for the next 30 years. And we just, in this example, they use a 10% return just because that's what it happened to be over this period that this analysis was run. But the end conclusion was that Aaron ended up with much more money at the end than Bizarro Aaron, even though Aaron only put in money for 10 years in his 20s versus Bizarro Aaron, who had to put in money for 30 years, the same amount each year for 30 years, and still ended up with far less than what Aaron would have ended up with. So that's one key thing that extra 10 years buys you.
I remember that the conversation on the math and kind of to break down Aaron at 30, who's been already saving for 10 years, the 10% growth on what has already been saved up was greater than that $6,000 contribution that Bizarro Aaron started making. So the growth on what I've already saved is at year 10 is already greater than the new contributions by Bizarro Aaron. And so kind of, if you can see that even from year one, that year 10 and 11, that the change in account value, even with no extra money added by Aaron, the increase in account value is greater than the increase in account value by Bizarro Aaron. So one went up by 6,000 with a new contribution. The other, Bizarro Aaron only went up 6,000. Regular Aaron went up by more than that, and that just keeps building and adding each year.
Yeah, right. And the quick numbers are basically 6,000 a year growing at 10% at the end of 10 years is you're at around $96,000. And that, 10% of that is, $9,000 to $10,000 without adding any more money, right? That's just the growth, which is more than, as we said, Bizarre Aaron would put in his first year. So it's kind of no catching up at that point.
Yeah. So I think the reason I liked the saving more aspect, and I think this is going to really appeal to you, was this is both kind of backed up with academic research, but also I've noticed anecdotally with my clients that when you're looking at your income, kind of you start working in your 20s, this is kind of your first time you have a job. If you're saving more and paying yourself first, the implicit result, whether you kind of intend it to or not, is that you're spending less. And so you're actually managing your expenses without having to think in terms of budgeting per se. Because you are not focused on restricting yourself from that perspective, when you save more and you're diligent about that, it kind of naturally and organically keeps your spending from increasing too much, especially as your income increases through your 20s. This is another reason why I like this piece of advice, is that as your income increases, which is very, very consistent and very common, if you keep increasing your savings, that also works to keep your expenses lower. And this has come out in a lot of kind of retirement and financial dependence research, that the two main benefits of saving more as it pertains to financial independence is, one, you're just saving more dollars. So you're exactly the example you described of, instead of only saving for 10 years and then stopping, realistically, you'll keep saving on top of that. So you'll get the 9,000 of growth, plus you'll keep saving that $6,000. So that's where you start getting kind of the really big compounding effects. But two, you've managed to keep your expenses at a level where you simply don't need as much money to support that level of spending. And so whatever kind of the future goal is, and mostly kind of, can I do this without impacting financial independence down the road? Can I buy this house? Can I spend this much on a car? Can I, those are kind of all the trade-off questions that people tend to come to financial advisors for. Can I know I need to save for my retirement or my future, like especially in your 20s, it's hard to think about retirement, but I need to save for my future. But can I do the thing now without hurting myself down the road? And if they are following that pattern of saving more, and again, it's more of almost a byproduct of spending less, it means that they don't need as much money down the road to support their lifestyle as they start to actually think about financial independence. And so when I think about that single most important piece of advice for someone in the 20s, I tend not to think in terms of the math and the compounding, although I'm very aware of how that plays out. I tend to think about the behavior aspect of, if you can save more, that implies that you're spending less. And then all these good things happen from that. You can give yourself so much other flexibility and decisions down the road, whether it's getting to choose the job that you want that maybe allows you to feel more fulfilled, as more exciting, but doesn't offer as high a salary. Maybe it gives you a chance to pay off your mortgage sooner. You get to make some of these bigger life decisions because you've established this really good behavior of saving more, and again, byproduct of reducing spending, that provides so many more possibilities later on in life. but you have to like build that foundation. You have to have that save more mentality first. And that's something that it's hard to just change behavior, and especially it's really hard to change lifestyle later on down the road. It's people and just human beings have this amazing capacity to get used to the lifestyle that they have, and they want to maintain that. And so, more common story is as their incomes grow in their 20s and their and 30s, which again is very consistent, their expenses go up as well. They can now afford a little bit bigger place, so their rents go up, and then eventually save up for a down payment on a house and their mortgage, and they're traveling a bit more. They're eating out to eat a little bit, like all those little things of just they're spending more, and that's okay. They can afford it. Like, this is not unhealthy spending. It's still within their means. They can still afford it based on their incomes, but as their spending has gone up, it means that the amount of money they need to save to support financial independence is just that much greater. And so that implies they either have to save more aggressively from their 30s, 40s, 50s, or they may have to work longer. And they've kind of committed to that level of spending and that lifestyle, and therefore committed to almost requiring that level of income. And so that's why I think about, if I was talking to someone right out of college, their first job, and like a single most important piece of advice is just save more. Realistically, if they're working at a company that has a 401k, I kind of challenge them to max out their 401k as quickly as possible. So this would be this year you can contribute 19,500 to your 401k. So if they're making 100,000 a year, maxing out their 401k is just under a 20% savings rate. And then I'll challenge them to get to that as soon as they can. I'll also kind of, if they can save at least 20% for financial independence, then they can also start to make decisions of, okay, now I'm making more than 100,000, still maxing out the 401k. I'm gonna keep saving more. That's be like down payment for a house, or they start to have kids and they're saving for college, things like that. So kind of, we've talked about in the past, like maintain that savings rate, but there's a little more flexibility in terms of what that ideal number is for different people based on incomes, lifestyle goals, etc. But I think just establishing that behavior and that pattern of saving as early as you can, that's where I tend to see the big benefits. And like you said, just when you add in the compound growth aspect on top of that, that's when it starts to get look really, really good.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those things where there are a few knobs that we get to control in our lives, and probably one of the most important knobs that we have at our disposal that can lead to strong changes and future outcomes of just how we're going to end up is that savings rate knob, the percent of income that we end up saving year after year. And there can be pretty big differences between keeping that knob, close to zero, which is quite common, where, most of the money that comes in goes right out the door, even if after you get a raise, it's kind of already earmarked on things that you want to buy in terms of scope creep and lifestyle creep and whatnot.
Yep.
But being able to kind of tune that knob to a more sensible number, it's certainly possible. And understanding the effects of doing that in your 20s can be pretty pivotal. So, like, for example, the savings rate, I'm not sure how old this data is, but we'll put the link in the show notes. On average in the US, people save about maybe 5% of their income on a gross basis. And what that kind of means is you have to work roughly 60 years to meet retirement goals based upon that. And if you're starting in, when you're 20, that might mean you have to work till you're 80 or something to really have enough comfort to be able to live off that. Now, there may be other subsidies that can help, like Social Securities and other safety nets, but it's really cutting it close if you're targeting a national average like that.
Yeah.
There are other countries who target a high, or end up having higher savings rate, and it makes a pretty big difference. For example, instead of having to work 60 years to be comfortable, well, the average, according to this data in Germany, is about 10 or 11%, meaning instead of 60 years, you can cut that back to around 45 years. So that's 15 whole years difference by just turning this one knob. And according to this data, some other countries have even pushed this even forward. Like there's in this data set, you have China and India where savings rates are close to 30%, in which case you would only need to work about 30 years to reach that type of financial independence. So these knobs can make a pretty big difference. I remember when I started to get my first few paychecks, I ran some of these numbers for myself, and I remember some advice that was given to me that if I can just save 20% of my gross income throughout my life, I would be far well enough ahead. And what I ended up doing is I went home and I ran the numbers and created spreadsheets, and then a light bulb went off and it said, what if I hit 50%? What would happen with that? And my over optimization brain said, well, it certainly might be possible. And running the numbers, if you can hit something like that, then you could reach financial independence in 20 years. And, just things like that can make such a profound difference on not necessarily how long you want to work, but how long you need to work. It just kind of becomes optional, or it kind of shifts the game in terms of opening up all of these options by changing this one knob in your life, the percent of gross income that you save. And of course, doing it earlier in your 20s can make all the more difference.
Yeah, I like that. It makes complete sense that you actually did the math. I totally believe that story. That just sounds like this, like what you would do. Uh, I'd like to kind of start to kind of add in some of those other small components that help, and it's kind of like it's almost like that snowball rolling downhill where all these little things keep adding up and helping. And it's things like I like max out your 401k. One, the 401k is just that much easier. It comes out of your paycheck. You don't even see it, so you don't even think about kind of from your first paycheck. If you sign up for your 401k and put a pretty high percentage on there, save 15% into your 401k, something like that, then you never get used to the money in your checking account. So like it's that much easier when your employer has a 401k to start that savings. Then opening up a Roth IRA at TD Ameritrade or Fidelity or Schwab, transfer the money in, making a purchase. So like that's another like little thing of just making it as easy as possible for you to start that savings. In the past, a lot of 401k defaults might have been either going into cash, you had to choose which investments you wanted, or going into company stock, which was way too risky. Now, most 401ks have a default of using something like a target date fund or a life cycle fund, which is exactly what you talked about when we talked about just picking the easiest thing. And so if you save 15% and the default is a target date fund, you're already going to be invested kind of aggressively enough for your age. Because I think that's the next subcomponent of seeing the most important financial advice. It's saving as much as you can, as early as you can, but also getting equity returns. I think that's where a lot of the kind of the compounding comes into play. And so that's kind of second simplest advice, but not quite the simplest. But yeah, just kind of putting money in your 401k, make it as easy as possible. Set up that systematic savings from the beginning. You get that investment, you get the compound growth. Retirement accounts tend to have a variety of tax benefits that work out just a little bit better. So saving into either a pre-tax 401k or a Roth 401k. Again, I would recommend the Roth because you're actually saving more than you could in a pre-tax account, just kind of the way mental accounting works. The 19,500 into a Roth 401k, given a, let's say, 25% tax rate, is equivalent to about $26,000 into a pre-tax traditional IRA, which in your 20s you can't contribute that much to a pre-tax. So that's why I said I like the Roth, just because it is kind of another additional forced savings. But again, trying to make it as easy as possible for you. Make sure it's invested. You get the tax benefits that retirement accounts provide. Like all of these other little things just kind of keep adding up. Not everyone has a 401k or 403b or a thrift savings plan. There's a variety of employer-sponsored retirement plans, but many people do, and that tends to be just kind of the easiest way to get started. Can you think of any other kind of those little additional benefits that just come from your conversation with a cousin or nephew or niece who's just graduated college and they're starting a job? And Trishul, I hear you're a financial advisor. I'd like to be successful and I want to start out right. What should I do? Now, what are some kind of extra benefits of the saving early?
Well, I think you keyed in on a big one, which is investment efficiency. You want to invest your money as efficiently as possible. And there are a lot of behavioral traps along the way that kind of can detract from obtaining efficient investment returns. And we've discussed that across many episodes. But what I'd like to put forward is you want to invest so that you kind of maximize your returns by, again, being tax efficient. As you had mentioned, that's definitely a big one. If you have the benefit of being able to put money in a tax advantage account, you want to go use that first if that money's meant for retirement. And certainly if you do that with a 401k, you are getting a good benefit from that. The other thing is, in terms of just what to invest in, I am a fan of just passively invested instruments because of their low fees. I remember when I first had the opportunity to invest in a 401k, this is almost 20 years ago. And I remember the company started a plan and they had the plan managers come in and provide us with a list of investment options. And I just looked through the list and I noticed, hey, where's the index fund option in there? And I remember them saying, well, it's an open architecture. You can do anything you want. And look, these are great. And then, I raised my hand. I'm like, but can we please have an index fund to invest in? So that's something to also be aware of, that, you want to, if there is not a passive option and that's something you believe is sensible, you might be able to, in fact, ask your employer or plan sponsor to get that in. It's something that after many months of back and forth, in fact, by the time they actually got it in, I had continued to berate them. I had left the company, but I kept hounding them for about 6 months after that. And finally, they got it into their plan. I had since rolled my money away, but it's possible you may get some pushback, but there's no sensible reason if they have an open plan that they can't do that for you. So getting a passive instrument and a 401k plan, I think, is probably one of the first things to target in terms of putting your money in. And then, as we mentioned, there's a handful of other flavors of tax advantage accounts that if you're eligible and you're able to, that you want to max those out as well. And then you want to think about your retirement accounts that are taxable, like your standard brokerage accounts. But doing that, you can, again, if you can leave it for long periods of time, it can make a pretty big difference. So from the investment standpoint, I think that amount of early contributions can put you on a pretty solid track. And then I'd say that the next set of things you can think about is what can you do to kind of get that savings rate knob to be a little bit higher if that's what you're going for. Meaning, if you're currently saving 5% a year, how might you get to that 10% of your gross income in terms of savings? And Aaron, you mentioned a few really good ones. For example, if your income is going up, well, you can kind of earmark that raise to go directly into your savings, or at least a good amount of that raise to go into your savings. That way, you're already comfortable living on, like 100,000 a year. If your income goes up to 110, you may not need that extra 10 immediately. So having a good portion of that go directly into savings might be a way to not have to tighten a belt, but still get more locked away for the future.
Yeah, I think that's another component of like the 401ks that Congress and the IRS have done a pretty good job of increasing the contribution limits over time. And so if your mentality kind of like the savings rate as you get raises, you're not thinking I need to save 6,000 per year or even 19,000 per year. You're thinking I need to max out my 401k. And it's as quickly as you can get there, if you can max out your 401k and Congress and IRS keep increasing the amount that you can contribute to a 401k, then you have this mentality, oh, I need to increase my 401k savings, or at least make sure as my income goes up so that I max out my 401k every year. And that's just, it's one of those almost overly simplistic ideas that anytime I put together a plan, if a couple can both max out their 401ks, all the financial independence stuff works out. Like if they're both maxing out their 401ks, and it's more complex and more nuanced than that, depends on their lifestyle, their incomes, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a really, really high correlation of if you and a spouse can each max out your 401ks, everything kind of works out. And then you get to kind of choose how do you want it to work out. Like, oh, I get to go do this, and maybe I can do this, and you start to kind of play around and consider other possibilities. But yeah, it's just the easiest way to consistently save, has the target date funds that are invested aggressively enough, and increases savings over time. So yeah.
Right. Just running the numbers very quickly. You and your spouse, if you save 19,000 for 35 years at a 7% growth, well, just that alone is over $5 million. And of course, it might be more than that because that 19,000 tends to grow. As Aaron, you mentioned, Congress adjusts that with inflation and whatnot.
That's even bigger than I feel like I've done those numbers and I've seen them, but hearing you say it still has that little extra weight.
Yeah, and in terms of all the things we think about doing to get to $5 million, if you just do this,
yeah,
you'd be in pretty good shape.
Is that our clickbait? The easiest way to get $5 million?
Did you just come up with our episode title, Aaron?
We'll have to look at maybe I guess we can have the conversation now. Like I do think whenever I see those clickbait articles, especially either in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, or even just on Twitter, like the story's like always, oh, the easiest way to pay down your debt. There's always kind of some kind of inheritance or the spouse's income. It's something like that they leave as like one super tiny blurb, but actually, no, you got to live in your parents' house rent free for 10 years. That's how you paid down your $200,000 of student debt. So I don't want to be I want to make sure that we're not being obtuse with the title. Like, yes, having a couple, so a dual income household with incomes high enough that they can save, can max out their 401ks. It is not that easy. Like that's a kind of a small subset of the population. But given that, yeah, that's kind of the easiest way to get to $5 million.
I don't know if we can fit all that in the title though.
That's why you do the titles and I don't. I even put that on my blog recently about stock options. It's like the clickbait title is you should exercise your ISOs in January. The real title is if you have vested, unexercised incentive stock options in a publicly traded company that you're planning on exercising this calendar year, you should probably exercise those options in January. Like that was like my title. It just doesn't roll off the tongue.
It's like how with books they have the actual title and then the paragraph subtitle.
Exactly. So it's the if you are married and both you and your spouse are working at companies that provide 401ks and your incomes are high enough to max out your 401ks, and this is a good 15 to 25% savings rate, then yes, the easiest way to get $5 million is you both max out your 401ks every year for the next 30 years. Was that the math you did?
I did 35, but
yeah.
Okay,
35. There you go. Yeah. So that sounds the kind of title that I would do.
But at the end of the day, it is saving year after year and kind of putting the money to work and letting compounding do a lot of the heavy lifting along the way.
Yeah. It's kind of like everything else after that is trying to make marginal improvements. Even like just the Roth IRA versus a taxable investment account. The tax benefits of the Roth IRA, like you could use stocks that don't yield dividends inside a taxable investment account, so you have long-term capital gains, and if you have an S&P 500 ETF, there'll still be some dividends that you pay along the way. But even if you account for that, or then like more likely you pay the taxes from your paycheck and you don't actually take money out of the taxable account, the account balances will be pretty close and you'll still be in really, really good shape either way. It's putting the money in the investment account, whether it's a Roth IRA or taxable. Like that decision is, again, like a marginal benefit. The tax deferred growth in a retirement account is better than a taxable account, but saving and investing is going to be the strength either way. Saving more in a taxable account will provide more money than saving less in a Roth IRA.
Right.
Yeah, it's saving on taxes. So making good, like for my clients, it's understanding investment risk of single stocks versus the taxes from selling, putting together a tax strategy. Like those are all marginal benefits and they can save a lot of money. So there's a very important conversations, but it's still going to come to like, how much are you saving? And as you increase your savings, and how much are you spending? Like, again, it's that flip side of the same coin. Although I do think now kind of another marginal benefit of using your 401ks is that most 401k plans don't let you buy individual stocks. You can't, they won't let you go in and buy GameStop and Tesla and Bitcoin in your 401k. I think some will have open brokerage accounts, but that just going to that level and knowing how to do that implies a sophistication that you know what you're doing. But again, good defaults, target date fund, 100% stock portfolio in a 401k. This isn't quite the protecting you from yourself as much, but yeah, it does make it harder to do those less efficient decisions.
Right. And then, also thinking back to somebody in their 20s, it's quite possible that, this is a time where an individual has the money to have disposable income and just spend it on things that maybe they've always wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But to kind of put it into the perspective, I mentioned this way back in an earlier episode where, let's say somebody's in their 20s and they're thinking about getting that new car, right? And they already have a car which they could trade in, but they could kind of, put that used car as a down payment and add a little bit more money and get a new car, which of course would depreciate by, like 30% in the first year. So let's say you put an extra $10,000 into that new car. Well, that again, a $20,000-$30,000 car, that $10,000 down payment is probably going to be out the window in a year or two. It just may not be there anymore because you have a depreciating asset. But if you take that same $10,000 and invest it and try to get your used car to eke out a few more years, well, that $10,000 over a 45-year time frame, from 20 to 65, could grow to a good amount of money. So, we don't know what it would happen for the next 45 years if we put 10,000 in the S&P, for example, right now. But what we could do is we could look at what would happen if we put 10,000 in the S&P for the last 45 years. And I ran some of these numbers, and what I actually did is, $10,000 today would be worth around 1,700 45 years ago. And then I said, okay, what would happen if you invested 1,700 45 years ago in the stock market, in the S&P till today? And that 1,700 grows to over $140,000. So, that one decision of new car versus used cars in your 20s could lead to a difference in just $100,000, $140,000 in your 60s. And, the market did have a great return over the last 45 years. So maybe that's not the best example. It's closer to just 10%. Whereas what I like to say is a good target for the market return, equity returns, might be closer to like 7%, something like that. But
Isn't it supposed to be like
tying, yep,
like inflation plus 6-ish, inflation plus 5 to 8%, something like that. Where if inflation was 3%, if inflation was 3%, then maybe a 10% nominal equity return makes sense. But because inflation is currently in the 1 to 2, that's part of what brings down equity return expectations.
Yeah, you're right. I think looking at an inflation adjusted return, I've done some modeling on that going back 100, 150 years. And after inflation, a real return for the equity markets is closer to like 6.5%.
Okay.
So in the ballpark, but just to keep the math a little simple, we talked about that rule of 72, meaning how long does it take your money to double?
Mm-hmm.
Well, at a 7.2% return, your money would double roughly every 10 years. So using that as a ballpark and that $10,000 number, well, after 10 years, the 10,000 would go to 20, another 10 would go to 40, 80, 160 after 40 years. So if you're 20 and you put $10,000 to work, you could be talking about 160,000 right there by the time you hit 60. And if you somehow manage to not spend that for 10 more years after that, well, at 70 years old, you're talking about $250,000 from that one $10,000, tweak that you made in your 20s.
Yeah. This actually goes probably back all the way back to our fire conversation, our first episode. Like, I agree with the math, and I agree with kind of like that decision in isolation. But if someone's in their 20s and they said, I'm already maxing out my 401k and I'm making sure I have a 25% savings rate between 401k savings and saving into cash for other goals, or even investing it, is it okay to buy the car? And my thought process is almost kind of, if you're saving that well, like I almost don't care what you spend the money on, kind of thing. It's if the savings rate's high enough and they want to buy the car, and I'll try and I'll go over like the behavioral aspects of and like happiness research where cars just become part of your baseline lifestyle within 3 to 6 months. And so it's no longer the exciting new car. It's just the car you get groceries with. So like I'll have that side of the conversation, but if they're saving well enough, then I'm okay if they buy the car or go on vacation or kind of have the apartment with a little bit more rent, kind of as long as the savings rate's high enough, they get to decide how they spend their money, kind of thing. Like it's a little more there's a phrase from, I think it's from Nudge, but it's a paternalistic liberalism of kind of like making those as long as you're saving, then you get to decide what you do with your own money.
Yeah, I agree with that. And part of what we related to before is it just might also come down to personal preference, where for an individual, if in their priority list they want to maybe reach financial independence as soon as possible, then knowing that this one change could lead to that drastic of a decision or difference in outcomes might be important to internalize.
Yeah.
And for another individual, it may be more important to understand that no, we have this goal and we're going to meet it in our 60s, and we're perfectly fine with that. Anything else, we want to live life to the fullest with any gravy left over. And there's certainly no right answer. It just might just be, what does an individual prefer, knowing that these options are out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And I like how we're trying to like the simplest piece of financial advice. Okay, well, we got equity returns in terms of nominal minus inflation gets real return. I just kind of chuckling myself about that. In terms of that, like that personal preference, that's why I like the life planning conversations. It's for if your income's high enough to max out your 401k and it's an appropriate savings rate. I think my emphasis would almost be kind of to get used to living below that income. And so you're not committed to requiring that level of income. Like, and if you love your job, that's great. Then you'll be happy for the next few decades. But if you save enough and and then again, flip side, keep your spending low enough, you give yourself choices as life goes along, where maybe you want to go back to school. Maybe you want to change fields. Maybe you want to try and start your own business. Like you have the flexibility by saving aggressively early on. That kind of anytime I'm doing kind of planning with someone younger, financial independence, retirement is kind of so far. Like they actually plan on working throughout their working career. Like they don't necessarily plan on to stop working. And so I try and get to refocus on, okay, well, if you're going to be working anyways, let's make sure it's at a job or company or role that you feel fulfilled, that you can thrive at, that you enjoy going to work. And by not requiring the really high salary from a job that you dislike, because you've saved enough from that high salary and kept your expenses manageable, you give yourself those choices moving forward to kind of make some of those big life decisions. I think that's why one of those little, pretty big ancillary benefit is that if you can save more, spend less, you can make some of those big life decisions without feeling stuck.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's essentially, it gets equated to options. It leads to this ability to make decisions that you may not be able to make otherwise.
Exactly. Yeah. Because every time I talk to someone in the 20s, they have no idea what they're going to be doing in the 30s. They have, it just, life changes so much that every person in their 20s is going to change jobs 1 to 3 times, if not more. That they're going to try and find what they want to do with their life. Like they don't know what they'd like their adult life to be like. And if we get them saving well at the very beginning, they get to make those decisions down the road.
I think what I also like about some of the notions that we reviewed in this episode is I think somebody in their 20s, I feel like these days there's a lot of crushing pessimism with how things are unfolding with uh, a lot of things that we've talked about where wages may not have been going up as much, but there's such a heavy burden with somebody in their 20s. If you kind of do the math on, wait, I want to save for my children's college, and college prices are doubling every 10 to 12 minutes, and healthcare prices are, $800 for an aspirin, and oh, everybody's working because you can't get social security checks because they're gonna make you work till you're 80 by the time you get there, and inflation's gonna kick in because the debt ceiling keeps getting raised and so on. But hopefully, at least we're providing something that somebody in their 20s can do to kind of bring back the control into their lives, meaning here's something that you can do. You can target your savings rate. You can save as much as possible, invest as much as you can in your 20s, and you can open up options that uh, may make all these other concerns a lot less of a concern.
I think that's a great point. It's that is one thing I do hear pretty consistently is for individuals going through an IPO kind of thing. They don't plan on quitting as soon as all their stock vests, but it's that control of their lives. They're seeking that feeling of being in control of their own lives, and sometimes it's okay, how do we use your financial resources? Maybe they because again, I work with people mostly in the tech industry because they have that's where a lot of the stock options come from. There's people who they want to leave their salaried job at an established company to go work at a startup. Like they just that feeling excites them, and so it's almost, in terms of the math, similar to that fire idea where they kind of need to build up the assets to support their lifestyle because they may not have much in terms of income from that exciting startup. And it's kind of realistic, like they should be able to get some, so they don't need to be completely financially independent per se. But pretty consistently, they're all seeking that control feeling, that feeling of being in control of their own lives. And it's hard to tell someone in their early 20s who just got out of college and is just starting a job that this is not quite universal, but a pretty common feeling, especially in the US as you get through your 20s and into your 30s, that like if you save now, you'll feel better in your 30s. You'll feel in control of your life. But that, I think you're right. It's that if they kind of can build up their financial resources and keep their expenses manageable, that control feeling is that agency of getting to choose with your life is really powerful. I think you're exactly right with that.
Good stuff, Aaron.
So do you feel in control of your own life?
I do. Yeah.
I think these days it's I feel control my life from, especially from a financial perspective. It's all COVID related that's causing the stress and anxiety.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad there's a light at the end of this tunnel. So
Yes.
that's what's giving you hope right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that was good talk. I like that. I like how we've tried the simplest piece of advice we could think of, and we still talked for almost an hour.
Well, I think the way I see it is the advice is simple, but maybe the rationale that goes into all the bits and pieces that lead to that advice, may take more than a fortune cookie size statement. But at least hopefully the advice itself will be simple.
I'm imagining myself working at a fortune cookie company, and I put on every single fortune, save more.
Spend less, save more.
Yeah, exactly. Like, every single one.
Right.
Okay. I think I'm ready to be done next. I'm going to keep chuckling to myself for a while.
All right, Ryan. Well, I enjoyed the conversation, and thanks everybody for listening. If you're enjoying listening to these episodes, do spread the word. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of the Mind Money Spectrum podcast. Be sure to visit mindmoneyspectrum.com to access the entire library of episodes. Remember, it's not black and white, but the wide spectrum of gray area where you get to pursue the freedoms you want in life. Opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly. Have a nice day.